Welcome to the Primetime Podcast, everybody, hosted here on the MVG Nick YouTube channel. My name is Nick, and I hope you guys are doing well whenever you are checking out the latest episode of the podcast. It talks all about all things in the world of TV, news, reviews, commentaries, and much more. Today is episode number 17 of the show, and it's going to be hopefully an interesting one for you guys. This is something that I've been thinking about for the past couple of weeks here. If you're familiar with the podcast in general, you know that one of the reoccurring segments and topics on the show is us looking at the recent Nielsen ratings, looking over the recent schedules for various TV shows, and comparing the different networks to see which ones are doing well and which ones are doing poorly so far for this TV season. And one aspect to it that isn't really discussed all that much when it comes to this topic that I really wanted to dedicate an episode for here is to kind of figure out which shows and specifically what genres do better on certain networks than others. Is there some sort of pattern there that we can decipher to figure out why certain shows or why certain genres do better on certain channels than others? So what I have for you guys today is an individual ranking for all of the major broadcasters here in the US, the main 5 channels that we tend to talk about the most often here, which go as followed here. We have ABC to start off with. We have CBS. We have the CW/WB/UPN. Those three all kind of interconnected to some degree. Of course, the WB and UPN previously held a lot of the shows that would end up merging onto the CW. So we throw all those together. Fox, and then finally NBC as well here. And throughout this podcast, what we're going to be doing is ranking all 5 of these individually based on certain categories here. In those cases, going to be certain genres of TV that all of these major networks tend to broadcast most often. Those are going to be comedy, animated/cartoons, reality competitions, and game shows, and finally the big ticket item, dramas. Each genre that we go over, we're going to rank all of the major channels from the bottom to the top here, 1 to 5, and we're going to go over some examples of shows that they've done well or shows that they've done bad in these certain categories, and kind of just get a general overview as to why certain genres are better for certain networks and vice versa there. Of course, I would love to hear what you guys have to say on this one as well. Leave your rankings in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. All I ask is that you keep it civil and hear others out as always there. So to start off with, we are going to start off with comedy here. Now, for our purposes, you could of course, interpret comedy as a bunch of different things. You could talk about sketch comedy. You could talk about talk shows that have comedy elements to them. You, of course, could talk about animated shows. That's going to be its own separate category in just a minute here. But for our purposes, comedy is going to be live action sitcoms. That is what we define here as comedy. And in my opinion, of these major 5 channels, the one that does it the least consistently, at least to me, is going to be Fox here. Yes, they have That 70s Show. Yes, they have Malcolm in the Middle. Yes, they have Married with Children. They've had some really good comedies over the years, going as far back as 1987 when they first started. Married with Children, probably the most famous example of that, running for 11 seasons, one of their debut shows that absolutely blew up, put them on the map back in the day. And over the decades, they've had a slew of really, really solid ones. That being said, for every example that is as big as That 70s Show, for every example that's as big as Married with Children, they have a mountain of just forgettable, absolutely despicable, unfunny, unprofound comedy shows that just have flooded their schedules over the years. Stuff like Grounded for Life, which I think is just incredibly overrated and overhyped. The Cool Kids, Mulaney, Rel, Arrested Development, another one that I just do not find any sort of interest in. And probably most infamous of all, That 80s Show, of course, the failed spinoff to That 70s Show there. Fox does a lot of really good things well, but just consistently in this particular category, they just do not have the staying power that a lot of the other networks do. Their current schedule includes stuff like Call Me Kat and Pivoting are the main two comedies that they're trying to push for the 2022 season, and both of them are just flopping on all accounts. They're both critically and as far as their competition is concerned, just getting eaten alive in the ratings here. Fox, I love you dearly, but the comedy category is one that you definitely need to work on quite a bit here because, like I said, for every great show that you have at least 10 or so that are just absolute failures, and as a result, I am putting them in last place. Coming in at number 4 in this category is going to be the CW / the WB / UPN here. Now, this is definitely carried, I think, heavily by UPN specifically with the slew of great African-American comedies that they had back in the 90s and early 2000s, such as Smart Guys, such as The Jamie Foxx Show, Moesha, The Steve Harvey Show, All of Us, and probably most famous, Everybody Hates Chris, which would eventually transition to the CW when the merger occurred back in 2006. But they have a slew of really underrated shows as well, such as Aliens in America, one of my favorites. What I Like About You, starring Amanda Bynes. That was her first kind of breakout show outside of Nickelodeon, and that was a big hit for them. And Reba as well, with Reba McEntire, of course, was a big, successful show on the WB for many seasons as well. I wouldn't say they've hit the same peaks as Fox. I wouldn't say they have a show that compares to something like That 70s Show, for example, but they've definitely been much more consistent over the years, and that's what counts here. In 4th place, I'm going with the CW, WB, and UPN, respectively. Coming in at 3rd place here for the comedy genre, I'm going with ABC. Now, this one personally is a little bit frustrating at times because ABC, without question, had the best peak of any of these channels during the mid-2010s with just an abundance of fantastic sitcoms under their belts. They had Modern Family, the early seasons of Blackish were phenomenal. Fresh Off the Boat, American Housewife, The Goldbergs, they just had hit after hit after hit. They were unstoppable. But in the past few years, they've definitely slowed down just that continual dominance that they once had with shows like Speechless. That was really disappointing. Recent shows such as the recent seasons of Blackish and the recent seasons of The Goldbergs, both of those definitely kind of crashing down from their peaks long ago. You also have stuff like Home Economics in there and the infamous The Wonder Years remake as well that we have talked about throughout the season as well here, that just have done ABC no favors whatsoever. Just again, getting eaten alive from the competition. They're competing on a really competitive night like Wednesdays is usually their comedy day, and they just do not have any staying power with audiences. They have had a couple decent shows so far this season, probably my favorite of which is Abbott Elementary. That's definitely one of the best comedies they've had in quite some time, but far, far, far from their peak, man, back in, like I said, the mid-2010s there. Even going back to the 90s or 2000s when they had stuff like TGIF. For every great show they had, like your Full Houses or your Family Matters, for example, they would have a slew of really, really bad ones all the same, such as Free Spirit was a very, very infamous TGIF show they had. Stuff like Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which didn't really do anything for me personally, so kind of balances out there again, kind of taking the good with the bad there. So overall, a really, really solid peak at times, and I think, honestly, of the main 5, the one that could have the best comeback in this particular category, but just the recent behaviors, recent actions that they have taken with this particular genre is definitely showing a downward slope there. Taking the silver medal here for the comedy category, my opinion is going to be NBC. Now, they are easily the number one purely on when it comes to quantity of huge juggernaut shows in the comedy category. That being said, I think quite a bit of them, in my opinion, are a little bit overhyped or a little bit overrated. looking at the list I have here, I just rattled off a ton of huge hit shows that I wanted to present to you, going as far back as the 60s and 70s up into the present day, with just a massive amount of titles like Parks and Rec, The Office, Third Rock from the Sun, Night Court, Mad About You, The Cosby Show, Superstore, My Name is Earl, American Auto, 30 Rock, Community, News Radio, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Will and Grace, The Good Place, Saved by the Bell, Friends, Family Ties, Cheers, Frasier, The Golden Girls, and arguably the best show ever to be made on TV, Seinfeld as well. Now, looking at that list of names, like I said, just the amount of shows that they've had in this category that are just massive juggernauts here, outmatched, easily the number one against any of the competitors. But for me personally, a lot of the shows here I just find to be a little bit overrated or just not very good. Never really been a big fan of The Office, as many of you guys know. Never really been big on 30 Rock. Definitely am not a fan of Frasier. I think the last couple seasons of stuff like Brooklyn Nine-Nine was kind of hit or miss at times when they picked it up as well. Stuff like Just Shoot Me, is just kind of okay at the end of the day, but certainly just on quantity alone, they easily deserve a second place mention here, but a little bit short of my number one channel in the comedy genre, which is going to be CBS here. Going as far back as the 50s with shows like I Love Lucy, really laying the groundwork for what modern comedies became. CBS really does not have a single era or a single decade where they weren't just pumping out hit after hit after hit. In the 50s and 60s, you have, aside from I Love Lucy, Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, The Honeymooners, The Munsters, Dick Van Dyke Show, The Monkees. In the 70s and 80s, we got stuff like MASH, Mary Tyler Moore, The Jeffersons, WKRP in Cincinnati, and The Bob Newhart Show. In the 90s, some of my personal favorites like Becker, The Nanny, Can't Hurry Love, and The King of Queens. In the 2000s and onward, we had stuff like Rules of Engagement, Two and a Half Men, The New Adventures of Old Christine, The Big Bang Theory, and then a couple of my personal favorites that I know some people are going to disagree with me, but Two Broke Girls and Mike and Molly as well are just personal ones that I had to include on this list as well. And then going into the 2020s as well, they have been very innovative with some of their shows, such as The Neighborhood, Bob Hart's Abishola, and Ghosts recently premiering for this recent season as well, that have just been huge names. And last but not least, of course, I had to mention How I Met Your Mother as well, my favorite show of all time under the comedy category, and CBS was its home for 9 seasons. So in my opinion, there is just no other network that can compete here. CBS easily taking the number one under the comedy category. Moving on from that, let's talk about the animated shows and cartoons that have premiered alongside all of these great comedy shows as well on all of these different networks here. Now, this is definitely a bit of a different category to discuss because most of these channels recently have kind of abandoned the animated or cartoon sort of genre here, with really only one of them doing primetime cartoons anymore. But many of them had Saturday morning cartoon blocks or stuff for the kids way back in the day. And it's interesting to see because a lot of these shows you'll definitely recognize just, as far as their titles go and how big of a name they became. And some of these big franchises where they originated from, you might not know exactly what channel they were on. So it's kind of interesting to see where they all got their start. And in my opinion here, pretty easily to rank as the number 5th in this particular genre is definitely going to be NBC, man. NBC has a little bit of a dry spell when it comes to their cartoon lineup here. These were the only 4 shows in just a sea of forgettable, really unmemorable, unfavorable shows that were listed online that they have premiered over the years, and none of these personally do anything for me. Between the Bullwinkle Show, Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Smurfs, and the most infamous of them all, VeggieTales, NBC is not your home if you are looking for great animated content. There is just nothing here that does anybody any favors. The fact that they even lasted as long as they did in this particular genre, running a Saturday morning cartoon block for about 20 years, is beyond me with this particular lineup. Really, really dreadful. Just absolutely no desire here to check out any of these shows. Coming in at number 4 here, I am going to go with ABC. Now, there is definitely an argument that could be made on behalf of ABC doing really well in this category. You definitely have the influence box checked very strongly under a lot of their cartoons. When it comes to the Flintstones, that is probably their most recognizable show there, and that show is extremely important in the grand scheme of things, really laying the groundwork for many, many other animated shows to come. It was one of the first to do prime time. It was one of the first to target adults, which is something that ABC continued on into the 90s as well, much, much later after the Flintstones, with shows like Capital Critters and The Critic really taking influence from the Flintstones there about 3 decades prior. The other shows they had that were pretty notable as well include The Bugs Bunny Show and The Jetsons you see there, both of those doing quite well for them as well back in the 70s and 80s. In my opinion, all of these shows definitely are influential and important in the grand scheme of things, but there's not really a lot here that I think would, you'd have to go and check out. You have to go and watch The Critic. You have to go and watch Bugs Bunny. It's definitely cool to see, again, where these shows got their start, but in my opinion, a lot of these shows kind of walked so that future series like The Simpsons and Family Guy and South Park and Bob's Burgers could eventually run and just become massive, massive shows in the genre here. Definitely an argument to be made there, but none of these really do it for me personally, so that's why ABC is sitting comfortably in number 4. Coming in and taking the bronze medal under the animated category is going to be CBS here. Definitely, you could argue quality over quantity with them. They really don't have that many shows produced. They definitely have the smallest amount that I saw, but 3 in particular really stood out to me as some of my personal favorites under this genre just of all time there, with Tom and Jerry, the Berenstain Bears, and Scooby-Doo. Those 3 alone, I could sit down, I could relax with those, watch them all day long, easily would all rank in my top 10 favorite cartoons of all time there. Definitely not something that I think they win points for as far as, again, the quantity of shows or the variety for that matter, because they have such a small selection. But quality is really, really, really on their side here, because those 3 are just absolutely amazing in my opinion. So they sit comfortably at number 3. The runner-up for this particular category here is a bit of a surprising one, but it has to go to the CW, the WB, and UPN here. I think a lot of people really forget how important Kids WB was back in the day, because they were absolutely on point with a lot of their original animated shows. They had a ton of really influential, critically acclaimed superhero type shows such as Static Shock and Batman the Animated Series, but they also delved into some of those more comedic type shows for the kids such as Animaniacs, probably their most well known in that regard. On the CW in the 2000s, they would have a couple of morning blocks on the weekends such as Toon's Eye and Vortex, where they played a lot of action-based shows out of Japan. They had a lot of those anime shows you see there, such as Dragon Ball Z, Sonic X, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Were absolutely massive when I was growing up. I remember people always talked about anime, which is now, of course, one of the biggest subgenres in all of TV. And the CW were really on the ground floor with that, picking up a lot of shows for syndication from international places and distributing them for an American audience, which eventually became just a massive, massive aspect to the animated world we know today. So very, very influential in that respect. And then as well, they had a couple of really, really key shows that really put them up high on my list in particular, such as Scooby-Doo, once again, the updated What's New Scooby-Doo, which was definitely one that I remember watching and growing up with. Love that show. And as well on UPN there, Home Movies, which I think is a very underrated, very, very simple yet very effective slice of lifestyle comedy there that premiered back in '99 on UPN for its first season. A lot of people forget that it was on UPN first before Adult Swim picked it up, and it ran for its rest of its the rest of the time that the show was on for an additional 3 seasons. But the first season was on UPN, so they get the credit here for bringing it to us first there. And all of that combined definitely gives them a solid second place win, coming up just a little short of the king of cartoons here. It had to be Fox, no question about it. Between The Simpsons, Family Guy, Futurama, Duncanville, The Cleveland Show, American Dad, King of the Hill, Bob's Burgers, you name it, they have it for you. Their selection of animated shows is truly unmatched. Like I said, they're really the only ones who are doing it prime time currently. They have a great selection of animated shows every Sunday now as part of their animation domination lineup that they've been expanding on and continuing to influence and just expand on for decades now. Of course, The Simpsons started way back in '89, which was 2 years after they launched. So they are definitely much more respected and much more known for their animation rather than a lot of their competition there. And that has just continued ever since they started way back 3 decades ago. Fox, without a doubt, has the number 1 slot in the animation genre. Let's move on to our next topic here, which is going to be the reality competitions and the game shows here. This is a topic that we don't normally get to talk about on the podcast, despite how big of a genre it is in current TV schedules. But in my opinion, easily the number 5 slot here goes to the CW, WB, and UPN because they only have one notable show in this entire genre, easily the least of any of these particular categories given any of the random networks there. Their really only claim to fame with this particular style is America's Next Top Model, a show that I've never seen, so I cannot judge. From what I hear, it's probably not something I would be interested in anyway, and it's the only one in this genre that they have of any sort of notoriety or fame, so yeah, that's that for them. Definitely more focused on more scripted content, which is probably a better move because that's more popular anyway, but even so, they are definitely going to come in 5th place on this one with only one show to their name. Coming in at number 4 here, honestly something that I could argue could even be below it, but they do have a little bit more to choose from, so they are going to get the slot right above it, and that is going to be CBS here. They have 4 main ones to their name, including Survivor, Big Brother, The Amazing Race, and Tough as Nails. There are the more the 4 primetime game shows and reality shows that they have currently. And of those 4, I only like one of those, and that is The Amazing Race. That was a show that I did watch quite a bit of back in the day, but I gotta tell you, for the last couple of years, I have not really had any interest in checking it out. And the other 3, I simply cannot stand. I hate all those other shows, especially Big Brother and Survivor. Their popularity and the fact that they've been on for 20 years now absolutely puzzles me because those shows are unwatchable in my opinion. Survivor is an absolute train wreck, and the fact that they do 2 seasons every single year makes it even more likely for me to put it lower on the list because that just makes their schedule just filled up with crap that I'm never going to watch. You know, I'd rather it only be 1 season a year so that they have some breathing room to put some other shows on that I might more likely be interested in checking out, but they just cram it in the schedule every single year. So that's why they have 40 something seasons over the past 20 years because they do twice every single season. And then Big Brother is another one that They just cram onto the schedule. Usually when they have a season of Big Brother, they broadcast it like every single day or every few days, and it just takes up way too much time on their lineup and just doesn't give the other shows enough chance to really get the audience that they deserve, in my opinion. And especially with the recent seasons like the Celebrity Big Brothers and stuff, just absolute garbage in my opinion. Just no interest from me at all into checking those out. So those four are the only ones that really have any sort of notoriety to them. I know that some people would also argue that like you could call The Price is Right on here and and Let's Make a Deal as well as their daytime game shows. And, those are fine. I'm not really big on those either all that much, especially compared to some people. I did like The Price is Right a little bit when I was growing up, but there are just other daytime game shows that I think are much, much better that we're going to talk about in just a second here, that I didn't really even bother to include them on this list because I don't think they would influence my ranking of CBS any different here. It's really about the primetime stuff. And for me, of the four they have, like I said, only one is really worth checking out, and the other ones are absolute bottom of the barrel tier. So CBS comfortably at number 4. Coming in at number 3 here, my bronze medalist for this one is going to be ABC. Now, they have always had a decent selection of shows, but at the same time, they've always been playing it very safe. That's probably the best way I can describe it. They don't really have anything that's super groundbreaking or super influential, really with the exception of Family Feud. That I will definitely give them. Family Feud is forever my favorite game show of all time, and they were the originators of it way back in the 70s with Richard Dawson as the host there. Absolutely a massive, massive show that still gets huge ratings to this very day. They do the primetime version with the Celebrity Family Feud with Steve Harvey, which is a ton of fun to watch, and that's always something I look forward to each year. And that leads me to my next point with ABC, which is the revival of all these game shows that they've had over the last couple of years or so. Supermarket Sweep, Card Sharks, Pyramid, Press Your Luck, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They've had a ton of different revivals for all these daytime shows, and I would say about half of them are pretty solid, and the other half are just kind of whatever. They're not bad per se, but they're just not very interesting either. So they kind of just cancel out in that respect. Again, taking the good with the bad there. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the original run of it back in the 90s with Regis Philbin, was pretty groundbreaking for its time. It was definitely one of the most popular, highest rated shows on TV when it premiered all the way back in 1999. And that success definitely carried into the 2000s as well. But when they brought it back with Jimmy Kimmel a few years ago, it just wasn't the same in my opinion. And definitely I don't think worth watching now considering all the great TV that has since come out. They also did the revival of American Idol as well, and we'll talk about the original in just a minute here. But American Idol, again, is another one that I love the original with all my heart, but the revival just wasn't really, doing it for me. Just wasn't cutting it. I don't really like the new judges. They changed the format a little bit where it just didn't feel the same. That's one of those examples of a revival or a reboot that really didn't need to happen, and they've just kind of been milking it for the last few years, and it's just not really the same as it was back in the day when they had it and the original sort of format of it. So in my opinion, again, that kind of cancels out. And then some of their other bigger ones are like Dancing with the Stars and The Bachelor, which I've never really cared for those shows all that much either. So really Family Feud carrying them in this category. Family Feud and Millionaire are really the two that I think are their top ticket items in this category, but the rest of them are just kind of forgettable, just kind of whatever. Not necessarily, awful, like offensively bad, not like CBS, but just nothing that really stands out either. Coming in at number 2 here on the reality competitions and the game show category is going to be NBC. Now, I've always given NBC a lot of props here because there were plenty of shows specifically in this category that I liked quite a bit when they were on, when they were, actively making new episodes for, such as American Ninja Warrior, The Biggest Loser. Last Comic Standing was pretty good. Hollywood Game Night was pretty fun. America's Got Talent I got into for a little while, but a lot of these shows have either ended or they've basically just milked them dry at this point. I think between America's Got Talent and The Voice specifically, which are really the only two left that they really, emphasize each year, both of those shows have pretty much gone the way of like an American Idol at this point, where they just haven't done anything unique, in decades, or not decades, but in the last few years or so, to make them stand out anymore. And that's one of the main problems why I just don't really care to watch them all that much, because there's so many better, more unique options out there that just do more for me. A lot of these shows as well were, big, but they weren't like, American Idol big, or they weren't, Dancing with the Stars even big. They definitely had their niche audiences, which were fine if you were part of it, but they just didn't really have that mainstream appeal as much as some of the other shows in this category. And then for their daytime game shows, they were the originators of Jeopardy there. So had to shout out Jeopardy because it's obviously super iconic there. Jeopardy, the primetime version does air on ABC, but the daytime show originally started on NBC. So again, they get the credit there for having it first. Overall, not a bad selection, definitely a lot of variety here, but just not something that I would particularly choose to come back to, given all of the more recent, more innovative shows in this genre. And that leads us to the number one in this genre, which is easily going to go to Fox here. 2 number ones in a row. You guys know that cooking competitions are my personal favorite type of this style, right? Any sort of reality competition revolving around cooking or food in any case is going to get a big, big thumbs up from me. And Fox has the market cornered in that regard with all of the Gordon Ramsay shows, whether it's Hell's Kitchen, whether it's his new show, Next Level Chef, or my personal favorite, MasterChef. In its prime, MasterChef was my all-time favorite reality competition show, and I think MasterChef Junior as well is quite good. Even if it's not exactly the same, it's still a lot of fun to watch. But even outside of that, they were the originators of American Idol, right? The original American Idol is forever going to be what I consider the best, not my favorite, but the best reality show of all time, simply for how influential it was and how popular it was. This is statistically, objectively speaking, the most popular television show of all time, with 6 consecutive seasons at number one. And the first year that it went number one, Fox, that was their first time going number one across all of the major networks as well. They owe a ton to American Idol for just putting them on the map and making their reality shows stand out more than any others. And like I was saying earlier about The Simpsons having such a big impact on them when they first launched, American Idol did such a big impact to them in the 2000s that they were just willing to put out anything and all reality TV. And a lot of the time it worked out really tremendously well for them. They were the first to do all of the cooking shows, and then a bunch of copycats came off of it. They were the first to do the dance competitions. So You Think You Can Dance premiered even before Dancing with the Stars or World of Dance, which would come later. And then obviously American Idol would have all of its copycats and spin-offs and rip-offs that tried to imitate the same, and none of them could be as big as the original ones. And even to this day, they are very, very innovative with some of their newer ones like Lego Masters, which is a very unique idea. The Masked Singer, which is really one of the only reality shows that's able to compete as big as it is with primetime dramas that have huge budgets and stuff. The Masked Singer, love it or hate it, is very, very popular. And that is definitely another show that's just very creative and very innovative in the Fox lineup there. And then for game shows specifically, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader as well? I think a very, very underrated game show there with Jeff Foxworthy, of course, as the host back in the day. Growing up, I was the perfect age when this show hit the airwaves. I was in that, elementary school, middle school sort of time frame when this show had its original run. So this was one of my favorites growing up, very nostalgic for me, and a lot of people my age as well there. And again, that's another one that's had revivals and such on Nickelodeon with different hosts and whatnot. But again, you can't top the original, and Fox was definitely one to be very innovative, very creative in this genre. So once again, taking a second number one in a row here, we have Fox at the top spot with the game shows and reality shows. And that leads us to our final discussion here, our final genre to go over, and that is going to be the drama category. This is definitely going to be the most competitive and honestly probably the most subjective because it really depends on what subgenres you like, if you like police procedurals, if you like crime shows, if you like medical shows, if you like, a Parenthood or This Is Us style show where it's like a family drama. It's really going to depend on what sort of topics you like with your dramatic type of TV, and that's really going to determine your particular ranking here. But for me personally, the only channel that I think you can objectively say does their dramas really, really dirty just based on the mismanaging of it and the poor marketing behind it, whether you like these shows or not, the way that this individual network treats their dramas far below where they should, given how popular they usually are, is ABC. They're going to come in 5th place here solely for the fact that so many examples of huge hit shows that they've had over the years, they have completely fumbled the ball with. Take, for instance, Big Sky. That's a show that I absolutely loved when it first came out last year. Season 1 was a massive hit for them. It landed in the top 30 Nielsen ratings. It had huge critical success, huge fan favorite show, mystery crime thriller aspect to it. Really, really solid. One of the biggest new dramas of the season. They, for some reason, thought that instead of keeping it on its day and time where it did successfully well for them previously, that they were going to completely move it off the schedule, put it behind shows that it did not match with at all, which were the Shonda Rhimes medical shows that it doesn't have any chemistry with, and put it against the toughest competition of the season, which was NFL football on Fox and the Law & Orders on NBC. And guess what? Big Sky absolutely got trounced in the ratings because ABC did not pay attention to this show and mishandled where they placed it on their schedule. And this is not just an isolated incident. They've done this many, many times. Quantico was another example from back in 2015. They had a massive, massive crime drama thriller show on their hands with it. It was huge with critics. It landed in the top 10 of various critics lists and various publications lists for the best shows of the year. And somehow they decided that it wasn't worth putting in resources for, and it wasn't worth putting in a big budget for. They scaled back the budget, they scaled back the production value of the show, and so it limited the potential of what they could do with the story. And from going from ranked number 55, which for a summer show is pretty damn good, considering that summer TV usually just absolutely fumbles in the ratings there, it dropped from 55 down to 99, just barely in the top 100, which is a very, very bad sign. And for season 3, it didn't even crack the top 150. It didn't even register for one of the top shows of the season because that's how bad the ratings were at that point. They went from about 8 million a viewer to down to 2 million, a fourth of what they had just 2 years prior because of ABC's mishandling of this show. Stumptown, yet another example of one of these big action thriller type shows that they completely mishandled. Had a great first season, huge fanfare, excellent cast behind it. Kobe Smulders, Michael Early, Jake Johnson, absolutely wonderful talent on this show. It was renewed for a second season, but instead of fighting for it and going and putting behind a huge budget for it that it truly deserved given its critical acclaim and its fanfare, they decided, screw it, it's not worth renewing. They canceled it, and it never saw the light of day, leaving fans with a huge cliffhanger that to this day has never been resolved. And they tried to shop it out to other networks. They weren't buying it. It was just a complete mess all around, and fans deserved better. So to this day, I feel like ABC is the only one that objectively does this worse than any other network here. Because like I said, I like a lot of these shows. I love Big Sky. Stumptown was excellent. I never watched Quantico myself, but I heard really good things. And even outside of that, they've had just a really, really good slew of shows in the past. NYPD Blue, Boston Legal, Private Practice, The Fall Guy, Charlie's Angels. I mean, going all the way back to the 70s and 80s, they've had really, really good dramas out there. The Good Doctor is another one that's on the schedule currently that I'm a big fan of, but just the way that they objectively just mishandle these and mismarket these all the time without giving it any prior thought is just like, totally despicable, right? Because dramas are a huge, huge draw, and ABC is absolutely getting killed every single time this happens on their own accord without even realizing what's going on. They're just not prepared for the competition. They're not prepared to put up the monetary incentive that these shows deserve, despite being owned by Disney, who could literally fund anything they wanted to, not listening to fans when it counts. They do their dramas so dirty every single time, and it is a huge shame. They are definitely getting last place here. Coming in at number 4 here, we have the CW / the WB / UPN here. Now, I think their biggest issue, and it's pretty obvious if you know anything about the CW type dramas, is variety. That is the major, major thing that everyone criticizes them for, that all of their shows are pretty much just a superhero show based on a DC type character, or they're a teen drama, or a mixture of both. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a very easy criticism to, throw at them, and it is true in an objective sense. They do have some really, really underrated dramas under their belt. I think that Naomi right now is one of their best shows they've had in a very long time. I'm enjoying that, and I'm not even a big superhero guy. I think that first episode was absolutely killer, and it definitely deserves all of its success that it's gotten over the last few weeks or so, being one of their biggest premieres they've seen all year long. Jane the Virgin is another one that was a big hit for them critically, and it did pretty well commercially. It ran for 5 seasons, which is very nice. That's a very interesting, kind of different approach to a drama that they normally would not have, that I think a lot of people kind of underestimated early on, but they were proven wrong. That was a really, really good show. And then, of course, critically acclaimed dramas like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gilmore Girls that premiered earlier on the WB, that both made the top 100 list just a few months ago I did on this channel. Another example of some really, really great drama shows that they had. But for every one of those, they definitely have their Veronica Marses that haven't aged well. They have their 100s that haven't aged well. They have their Riverdales, which are just plotting and just, running out of ideas now. They are just like every other network where they have their ups and downs, but they at least know when to put the money up for these shows and when to cut them. They don't play games around like ABC does with the schedules or the budgetary restrictions or anything like that. They know what shows do well and how to treat them right. And for that, at least, they definitely deserve a little more credit than ABC gets. But at the same time, the lack of variety and, the shows that they definitely have that aren't really appealing to anyone definitely will put them down at number 4. Now, for the last 3, these 3 are definitely all in consideration for the number 1 category. For me personally, this was really just a matter of what shows do I like on all these channels is really the thing that separated them all in these last 3 slots. And for me personally, the bronze medalist here is going to be Fox. I think that most of the shows that they've put up in the last 20 or so years are easily worthy of all of their acclaim and all of their prestige and all the awards that they've collected over the years. They've had huge critically acclaimed shows like House, The X-Files, Empire, Firefly, 24, Prison Break. All of those easily could be called some of the best dramas of all time. Without question, Fox does them very consistently. I think my big issue with them personally is the amount of stuff they had that it's not necessarily bad, but it just feels like filler. That's the best way to describe a lot of the shows they've had, such as Glee, such as Red Band Society, such as Lucifer, such as Gotham, such as Party of Five. None of those shows are necessarily awful by any means, but they don't have really a lasting impact either. They're just kind of forgettable, I feel like. And that's one of the biggest problems with Fox, especially now in their current lineup when it comes to their dramas, is that 911 has been such a juggernaut for them that all of their other shows are completely overshadowed by it. The Resident, Our Kind of People, The Cleaning Lady, The Big Leap, none of them have gotten the proper attention that some of them deserve and some not, because they have just been putting too much emphasis on 911, right? That's kind of the opposite example of it, where they put too much money or too much marketing or too much advertising into one show, and they kind of forget about the rest. And 911 is certainly deserving of all of its success. I mean, it can definitely rival some of the biggest dramas on TV, going up against the Dick Wolf shows right now. Very, very close as far as the numbers they're both putting up. But it's kind of working against them in that respect, where they need to kind of take it back a little bit. They need to kind of pump some of the resources into some of the smaller shows to bring them up to that level where they have a nice variety of dramas that are all really consistent with one another, as opposed to just one that is just overshadowing everything. And then as well, the other sort of flaw with Fox is they just don't have the same sort of history behind them. They're obviously a smaller network, and they've only been around for about 30 years as opposed to NBC or CBS that have been around for 70 years. So really, they don't have a lot of those historical dramas. The closest thing they have is something like 21 Jump Street, which is a really fun show, but it's definitely shown its age, right? That's a very cheesy, over-the-top 80s action drama, which is a ton of fun at the same time, but you're not really supposed to take it seriously, right? That's kind of the catch with it. So all in all, definitely a great selection of stuff here, but there's just a little things here and there that I think they could do a little bit better if they just kind of tapped into some of those resources, like I said, kind of spread the wealth amongst some of their other shows right now, instead of just piling it all into just a few that are huge juggernauts. Coming in at number 2 here under the drama category, we have CBS here. Now, CBS is probably the number one when it comes to just huge franchises they have over the years, such as the NCIS shows, the FBI shows right now, the CSI shows. They have their Linsky-verse, which is a combination of Magnum PI, MacGyver, and Hawaii Five-O, all the remakes they had, sort of the MCU equivalent, kind of, cross multiverse sort of connections they have on those shows. And it's very similar to Dick Wolf in that respect, where they have crossover episodes and there's, cameos from certain characters in those shows. And all of those have been big successes as well for them. But that leads me to my other point about CBS, which is they love their remakes, man. They absolutely love their remakes and their spin-offs and their reboots for all of their big dramas. They have done so many over the years that it's hard to keep track of how many, honestly. For every show that they have just kept pure, like a Blue Bloods, for instance, even though that show's been around for 12 years, 12 seasons now, they have never made a spin-off for it. They've never made a prequel or anything like that to it. They've just kept it, pure and left it alone, which is awesome. But for every show they have like that, there's at least 10 that they've tried to remake or they've done a spin-off for or something, and that's how you get those big franchises which a lot of people are not fans of, right? They want something new and original. They recently came out with CSI Vegas this year, which was a pretty big hit for them all around. It did get renewed for season 2, but a lot of people criticized them that it was just a retread of the original CSI. It didn't do anything different. Criminal Minds has had plenty of spin-offs over the years. Despite that being one of their longest running shows, they still have it on the schedule now. It's actually being moved to Paramount Plus, I believe, in 2022 to 2023. It's going to be on there. But even still, right, after 15 years, they won't let go of that show, and they've had just countless spin-offs ran from it. They also have stuff, like I said earlier, like the FBI's, which just had their recent show, International, just came out last year as well. So, again, another sort of argument in that canon. But regardless of what you think of that, I think personally that they've historically had a lot of fantastic ones as well. They have The Twilight Zone, which is undisputably probably the most influential drama of all time, right? And like huge credit for them to having that in and of itself, because that alone would definitely carry them up to at least number 2 there. They've had records held for the longest running drama of all time with Gunsmoke before SVU came in and overtook it there. They've had some great medical shows in the past, such as Diagnosis Murder and Chicago Hope, that were huge for them. They've had some great cult shows like Ghost Whisperer and Scorpion there that were just, really, really solid, 4 or 5 seasons, never had a big spinoff or anything, but definitely found a good, solid fan base to hold on to, critically acclaimed as well. So all of that, is kind of building them back up as a really, really solid channel when it comes to dramatic TV. Yes, they definitely have a habit of remaking stuff, but that's only part of the immense amount of variety that they offer. I think people tend to focus on those a little too much at times and kind of forget about the bigger picture of some of the other smaller shows they have that are just as good in that respect. But that leads us with one more channel to discuss here in the drama category, and that, my friends, is going to be NBC. This one was very easy for me personally because they have the Chicago shows and Law & Order, of course, any Dick Wolf stuff, I absolutely love it. And they're pretty much the only shows that I regularly keep up with in the drama genre that I'm watching, week to week. Every time I got to watch the Chicagos and the Law & Orders. And in addition to all of that, they also have just a ton of huge, critically acclaimed cult shows from years past and currently as well, from The West Wing to the original Star Trek, ER, Hill Street Blues, Friday Night Lights, Freaks and Geeks, Hannibal. I mean, all of those shows, or most of them, I believe, made the top 100 list, right? They absolutely just dominated in that respect. They don't play around with bullshit like ABC does, where they mismanage everything. Every once in a while, you'll get a show like Freaks and Geeks, right, which was canceled prematurely and then realized later was absolutely huge and, deserved its acclaim. But for the most part, like The West Wing's ER, ran for 15 seasons, well-deserved. Hill Street Blues, they honestly could have canceled that pretty early because early on, it was not a big success for them, but they kept with it and it ended up becoming one of the biggest shows of all time there. So well-deserved in that respect. They just have a really good knack for finding shows that they know their audience is going to enjoy and renewing them when they matter and canceling the ones that are filler. They don't stick around with, just shows that they have on for 15 years that no one wants to see anymore. People are just as excited now as they were back in 1999 when SVU premiered. The ratings are still very, very strong. They're going to release the revival of Law & Order, which is getting a lot of traction here. A lot of people very excited for that. They don't have a Grey's Anatomy situation where, even after 15 years, people are just not interested in it. They don't have a Family Guy situation where after 20-something years, people aren't interested in it. They manage to maintain these shows way better than all of their competition is. And for that and many other reasons, they are taking home the #1 slot in the drama category. So that is the episode, my friends. I hope you guys did enjoy it. Let me know how you would rank all of these channels in their respective categories. Which ones do you think are the best in each one, and which ones do you think are the worst? I would love to know your opinions on that. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to share this video out with someone who loves TV just as much as us. We will see you in the next one, guys. Take care and have a great rest of your day.